Hello. Welcome back to the channel, and this is a channel where we give you reviews, playthroughs, unboxings. We generally like to talk a load of bollocks. That's tabletop gaming in general. And in this video, we're going to be talking about a two-player, well, I say war game. It's based on a Cold War. We're going to be talking about Twilight Struggle. And in this game, you will be trying to gain influence in different regions, hoping that you have the most influence in each region when the scoring card comes out. That will give you victory points that will allow you to win the game. So in this video, we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of the rules. We'll be telling you what we do like, what we don't like. And we'll come back and we'll tell you whether or not Twilight Struggle is still worth playing. When was it? 2002? Oh no, this is the deluxe print anyway, 2015. So remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Hit the like button and all that YouTube bullshit. See you after this. Bollocks! So, Twilight Struggle. How do you play this game? So Twilight Struggle is a two-player only game that follows the events of the Cold War from 1944 to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. One player is going to take on the role of the United States and the other player will take on the role of the Soviet Union. Funny old thing. You'll do a bit of setup. The Soviets will place influence in certain regions and the Americans will put influence in Western Europe. You'll also gain control of a couple of battleground states that are denoted by their purple banners above the influence areas, right? So this game takes place over a number of rounds. There may be 10 rounds in this game, and these 10 rounds are divided up into early war, mid-war, and late war events. Each of these event epochs is going to utilize a deck of cards. You've got the early war cards, you've got the mid-war cards, and guess what? You've got the late war cards as well, right? So when you take a turn, the Soviets will go first, then the US will go next, and you will get a hand of 8 cards, and in each turn you will play 8 or more of these cards and then you'll start the next turn, right? So the first thing that you are going to do is you're going to improve the DEFCON status, right? DEFCON status is represented by a track at the bottom of the board. You'll move the DEFCON status down one spot, right? If you ever trigger nuclear war by moving up to DEFCON 1, then
normal programming has been suspended for an emergency message by His Majesty's government. Please stand by for further information.
Bollocks. You lose a game, right? Because nuclear war isn't particularly pleasant. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to deal up to a hand of 8 cards. And then both players will engage in what's called the headline phase, right? You have to choose a card from your hand and then you will play it in front of you, right? And you will activate the event that's on the card. You will see that each card has dual uses. You'll be able to use it for the points at the top of the card, or you'll be able to trigger the event. You'll also see that the points at the top of the card are either in red or blue. You can use the points for your own gain, right? Doesn't matter which color they are, but if you use points that have your opponent's color, then your opponent will be able to trigger the event on the card. So you've got to be very careful that you don't hand any kind of advantage to your opponent by doing so. So once you've done this, then you will go on to the meat and potatoes of the game, which is the action rounds. This is where you'll be playing cards from your hand and you'll be choosing what you're going to do with them. You'll be able to use the cards for certain things. You'll be able to use the points on the card to place influence markers onto the board. So if you play a card with an influence of 2, this means you can add 2 influence to a region on the board, but it's got to be either adjacent to a country that you already have influence in, or it's got to be adjacent to your home nation, right? You'll see that each of the countries has an influence value, and if you match or exceed this influence value, you will take control of the country, and this is useful for scoring, right? You also got to be aware that your opponent can come in and place influence. This will subtract from your influence. You've got to make sure that you've always got more influence in your opponent in the region. So the next thing you can do is you can make a realignment roll. You'll be able to pick a target country with enemy influence marker, and then each player will roll a die. You will modify the result as follows. You get +1 for each controlled adjacent country, +1 for each adjacent country to your superpower, and then +1 for the player with more influence in a target country. And then the high roller may remove the difference worth of influence, right? This is a good way of quickly removing opponent's influence in a country that you have got an interest in. You can make a coup attempt, right? You'll be able to pick a target country with an enemy influence marker, and then you'll roll a die. You'll add the operations value of the card. You'll subtract double the stability number of the target, which is the little number above the influence boxes. And if the result is positive, the coup succeeds, and you'll remove the difference worth of influence. And these count for military operations. At the end of each round, you will have to have more military operations points than the DEFCON status. Otherwise, you will lose victory points, right? There's a good balancing act here where you've got to make sure that you conduct military operations, but not so much that you trigger nuclear war, right? So the next thing that you could do is you can advance on the space race track. You'll play a card and you'll use the operations value of the card. You'll roll a die and you'll consult the track. And if the roll is successful, you'll move up to the next area on the space race track and you'll get the benefit. And then the final thing that you can do is you can play the card for its event value. So you'll keep doing this until either one player has 20 victory points or when someone plays a scoring card. If you've got a scoring card in your hand, you're going to have to play it. You can't hold on to it. If you do so, then you will lose the game. When a regional scoring card comes out, you will score the region as follows. You'll get points for presence if you control one country in that region. You'll get points for domination. That's if you control more countries and at least one battleground country. And you'll get points for control. That's if you control more countries and all of the battleground countries in that region. You'll also win the game if you control the whole of Europe when the Europe scoring card comes out, or if your opponent does a dumb thing and drops the Tsar bomber on the Houses of Parliament, right? So what do we like? About Twilight Struggle. So the first thing that we really like about Twilight Struggle is that this game is an accurate representation of the timeline of the events that occurred during the Cold War. All of the major events are included in the game. You've got the Marshall Plan card that allows you to add one US influence in each of 7 non-USSR controlled Western European countries. But the NATO card has to be played before this card is used. So it stands to reason that NATO has to be in existence before the Marshall Plan was enacted, right? That's super, isn't it? Or you might play the de-Stalinisation card. This is a card that refers to a program that was instigated by Nikita Khrushchev in the early 60s. And it says USSR may relocate up to 4 influence points to non-US controlled countries. No more than 2 influence may be placed in the same country. Or you might play one of the war cards, right? You might play the Korean war card. It says North Korea invades South Korea. Roll 1 die and subtract 1 for every US controlled country adjacent to South Korea. And you will get 2 military ops points for doing this. Or you might play the captured Nazi scientist card, and this refers to a US plan called Operation Paperclip, when after the Second World War they took the majority of the most prominent German scientists, especially rocket scientists like Werner von Braun, over to the United States to initiate their rocket program and their ICBM program for their nuclear weapons, right? And it says advance the player's space race marker 1 box, right? So all these cards are historically accurate. They are a little bit biased towards the Americans. Yeah, there is a little bit of anti-communist bias in this game, but I don't think many of you lot, especially you lot at the back, are going to be too bothered about that, are they? The second thing that we really like about Twilight Struggle is not only the dual use cards. You can either use the cards for the operations points or the event, but the most fascinating thing about this is that if you use a card for the operations points and it's got your opponent's colour in there, then you are going to be allowing them to activate the event on the card. For instance, if I'm the Americans and I play the Brezhnev Doctrine, it gives me 3 operations points, which is pretty tasty, but it allows all further operations card played by the USSR this turn to increase their ops value by 1 up to a maximum of 4. So in effect, if I play this card early, then I might be gifting 5 ops points to my opponent, right? But if I play it late or not at all, then it's not going to have the impact that I want it to, yeah? So the dual use or even the triple use cards, just give me that like tingling feeling, do you know what I mean? So the next thing that we really like about Twilight Struggle is that focus switches from region to region throughout the game, right? You've got to be mindful about which scoring cards have and haven't come out yet. You've always got to be prepared for the fact that one of the scoring regions may come out, and this opens the door to a little bit of bluffing. You could put some influence into Central America, which would draw your opponent's gaze over to that side of the board, when in effect you're holding the Asia scoring card and you've got just enough influence in there to score some points, yeah? The fact that you are not allowed to focus on one region for too long means that you've got to be constantly re-evaluating not only the board but your opponent's intentions, right? And if you are allowed to pull the trigger on a scoring card and your opponent's not prepared for it, mate, that's fucking awesome. So don't we like that Twilight Struggle? So the first thing that we don't like about this game, and it's something that doesn't really sit right with me, is the random die rolls when performing coups and realignments, right? This game feels like it should be 0 luck based, yeah? And the fact that you're using a die to potentially remove your opponent completely from a country and maybe take control of that region just before you perform a scoring card means that it feels a little bit unfair at times. And this works both ways. And I suppose some of you lot would be saying, well, that creates balance, but it doesn't, because essentially the fate of of that country and the fate of the scoring card comes down to a couple of random die rolls. And coups are important because you've got to make sure you've got enough military operations to not lose victory points. So you are sort of forced into either playing war cards, if you ain't got any, you can't do that, or performing a couple of coups. And I suppose it sort of mirrors the haphazard nature of the Cold War. Both sides didn't really know what the other side was planning throughout the duration of the Cold War, yeah. So on occasion they just threw caution to the wind and took risks, yeah. But it just feels that there could have been a non-luck based resolution mechanism to these actions, right? And as such, the random die roll sort of sucks. So the second thing that we don't like about it, and again this stands in stark contrast to the way that the game is presented, right? The game is presented as a timeline from the early Cold War all the way through to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But throughout the game, when you move into different epochs, you're going to be mixing both the mid-war and, if you get that far, the late war cards into one deck. So even though you might be in the mid-war, you're still going to be pulling early war cards out of the deck, and that makes no sense to me. I'm not a games designer, right? It would have made more sense to me that you would have taken the early war cards out and just played with the mid-war deck, and then when you move on to the next epoch, then you play with the late war deck. But it's not there. You might on one turn be pulling out the Iron Lady card, and then you'll be pulling out the Fidel Castro card. That sort of disrupts the ambience of the game for me, and it's just a little bit weird. So the final thing that we don't like about Twilight Struggle is the scoring cards all appear in the early war deck, right? There might have been a reason for this. I suppose the designers have play tested this to death, and there might be a reason for this. And I'm sure that this comment is going to attract all these spotty Twilight Struggle odious ghouls from the swamp to tell me why they did this. But the scoring cards only appear in the early war deck, right? So it might be the case on occasion that you are going to score all of the regions before you even get to the late war. So again, that makes no sense to me. I know we said that you're going to be mixing the decks together, so there's a sort of mid to high probability that you're not going to be able to get through all of the cards before that. But we've played games of this where we've never even got to the late fucking war, right? So you're never going to see any of those cards. And to be honest, the game, even if you do get to that point in the later rounds, say round 8, 9, whatever, even if you do get to the late war, then the game would have gone on for too long and I would have had brain meltdown. So the fact that scoring cards appear only in the early war means that you may see them all early in the game, and if they do all come out and nobody wins, then the game goes on for far too long, right? So to summarise, is Twilight Struggle still worth your time and bother 8 years after this deluxe edition, but not the original paper matte printing edition was released in whenever it was released? So we're going to say yes, absolutely. This is one of the best two-player games ever created. It's tense, it's historically accurate, and it provides a highly strategic 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, however long you want to play it. The random die rolls for coups and realignments are desperately disappointing. That is the Achilles heel of what otherwise would have been a perfect game for us. And the game can drag on for too long on occasion, but if you are after a fascinating two-player only game that's based on the Cold War, or just a fantastic two-player game, then this is the one that you should go to first. Wait, so you go, that is Twilight Struggle. Remember, if you're new here, and please consider subscribing to this channel, hit the like button, all that YouTube bullshit. We'll see you next time.